first of all, your reflections to what you just heard.
Possibilities and threats.
Yes. Robert.
Well, I sort of like the idea of us walking around in the cloud or in the fog, as our foreign minister put it. I think that many of the things that I will focus on during this panel is exactly that, but from a different perspective. There's sort of a rule of law fog. That there are so many possibilities, but also negative possibilities, and a difficulty in actually adhering to the rule of law because of all the different and complex issues surrounding this idea.
So, well, we know this is complex. What is the next step, would you say?
Well,
we're discussing now how should we do this.
Yeah, well, one step. Of course, there's always a wish that the legislation would, catch up with the technique. I seriously doubt that we will see that. I would sincerely hope that the checks and balances that Ross was talking about earlier would also catch up, because there is a huge imbalance, I would say, in the society. Both when you have companies on the one hand, you have states on the other hand, but then you have the civil society, the courts, lawyers, as we are, and we don't really know what we're talking about, to be honest. And I hope I'm not alone about that, but that's how I see it.
Patrik Hiselius, we are all aware that the wind really blows at TeliaSonera right now. What is the next step when people talk about the next step when you are selling network to other countries and so on? When you have to balance the freedom towards the security, what are your reactions right now?
My reflections go that there has been recently a most important step, and that was mid-2011. Society at large, all stakeholders, agreed on the Protect, Respect, Remedy framework, the United Nations framework for business for business and human rights. And based on that consensus that this is a framework to move forward, all the different stakeholders now, of course, have started to look into and put work into what does that mean for us as a company, what does that mean for us in our sector, how do we work to respect human rights. And as you say, for TeliaSonera, the most material human rights for us as a company and for our users is freedom of expression and privacy, and that's why we have focused our work on those human rights latest years. And also, most recently, Tuesday this week, peered together with a line of other telcos, putting about version 1 of a set of principles, how we want to continue our work on respecting freedom of expression and privacy.
Do you think that is enough?
It's not enough. It's what I'm talking about here is that Tuesday this week we achieved 2 out of 3 steps. So we have together formed and arrived at this set of principles, and we have published them. We have also found a home for these principles. We will work together with the entity which Google belongs to, the Global Network Initiative. So those are 2 achievements. Now, of course, together with our peers, we need to implement these principles. Continue to do so in our different companies, but also together within this initiative.
I think there are a lot of network operators here in the audience as well. Let me put it this way, maybe it can be easier to discuss. How far can a network operator go in order to protect users' integrity, would you say?
Our duty is to respect the human rights. So the UN framework clarifies that it is the state duty to protect. So it's our duty to respect the human rights such as privacy and promote. And that means 2 things. So we need to follow the law, adhere to the law, but the law is not digital. So that means that you need to find, as a company, if you're devoted to respect human rights, a point of challenge. Review the requests. Discuss with other players, such as the home government or the UN or NGOs. Maybe appeal. Work for transparency. And most importantly, also do this together with peers so that you have any impact. Because as a single player, you have very little impact. But if you go together, such as now the Industry Dialogue and the Global Network Initiative with its companies, you can have a greater impact. So a point of challenge when following the law, which is not, the law is not digital. And then, as I said, respecting the human rights by working with our processes, internal training, internal principles, and internal governance and compliance within the company.
Just want to check with you also, Ingvar Åkesson. You have another point of view when it comes to look upon this. You talk a lot about vulnerability. Tell me more about that.
Oh yes, the internet development has been very advantageous for our societies, but it has also created a vulnerability that is used by cyber crime. So from our perspective, we can see that cyber crime here and now is compromising many IT systems, stealing money, intellectual property, and other commercial secrets, and also intimidating ordinary people. That is what is the downside of the internet, which we perhaps are not all of us aware of. And certainly there are on many management levels there should be a sort of enlightenment around this question. Because in the end you might question if this evolution endangers our future wealth. That is our perspective.
Robert, do you have the same worries as the other gentlemen in the panel, or are you focusing on the same thing, do you think?
Well, of course, I'm having a bit different role, and from that perspective, of course, I see some things somewhat differently. One thing is there is a monopoly, one could say, when it comes to describing the problems, the threats. And that is always the case when talking about interception in any sense. The foreign minister was referring to telephone tapping. We had that discussion about 10 years ago about bugging and secret surveillance in Swedish legislation, which feels like today it feels like ages ago, because the development has gone way far from that. But there are some similarities, and that starting with the describing the problem. Each time has its own threats. So you have motorcycle gangs, you have people from Eastern Europe coming to Sweden to steal everything we own. We have terrorists, we have you name it. And the monopoly of describing the problem lays to a large extent with the same authorities. They're also asking for the new devices, the new technique. In the other end of the line, it is the same authorities are also reporting back, also getting back to what we were talking about earlier, about transparency, reporting back to, for instance, the Swedish Parliament about how the technique is being used. And in Sweden, for many years, I would doubt if they had removed it. I haven't even checked lately about telephone tapping. Usually, to these reports, which is also the reports, the quality of the reports is not that good. To compare with, for instance, Google transparency reports, which is, it's a good initiative. But if you look at the quality of the reports, there are so many things to wish for. Getting back to the Swedish example, they added, the police and the prosecutors every year added to the reports a picture of drug-related crimes in Sweden, how the drugs are being flooded into Sweden, something which is really not directly connected to the report as such, but a way, of course, to enhance the need for these different techniques. And to a very large extent, an outside research on the problems that we face and that we use as an excuse to expand the advantage of technologies are not in place. So there's sort of a lack of balance in the process.
Okay, but can you all three be more concrete in how we can fight crime? For example, how can operators, network operators and the police cooperate against child pornography? Do you have any ideas what the next step could be? Because we know what the problem is, but how can we solve it?
Well, one important thing is, which were also in the documents that I received beforehand, was cost. So who is paying for surveillance? And that's quite interesting because, of course, as a private player, we should not indulge in, wanting more surveillance to earn money. So there shouldn't be, surveillance based on a business case. However, the cost should, for the authorities to use operators as a tool for surveillance should neither be zero, because if there is no cost for the authority to conduct the surveillance, then there is no limit. They can do as much tapping or surveillance they want because there is no limit. So actually a cost-based system which indulges a cost on the authorities, but the operator does not earn money, I think is the best way. And then as to child pornography, as was mentioned earlier, we have a well-received collaboration between all of the large operators in Sweden and in many other countries, where we block our users' access to sites which the authorities have listed as containing child sexual abuse images. This said, there are lots of challenges in this system. There are challenges as to rule of law, as to transparency, as to the level of efficiency, and there's no third-party overview. So the stock market, our employees, our customers, media, everyone wants us to do this to protect the children. However, there are some big issues there that we need to deal with collectively.
The kind of cybercrime I was talking about could be fixed in some way, because about 80% of all those attacks could be defeated by embedding basic information assurance practices by the system owners. So if they want to be protected, they can be in a quite big scale. The remaining 20% are the sophisticated attacks made by intelligence organizations. That is a problem for the government agencies to deal with.
But do you think
mostly, if you just do due practices as a system owner, you can avoid a lot of those attacks.
But do you think governments and others have the knowledge enough to sort of realize the consequences of all this?
No, that was what I told you before in the beginning of this panel discussion. The awareness is weak. It should be enhanced. People should know better on the management levels. And how long time do we have to reach this level? It's here and now, so we don't really have much time. A big company putting a lot of resources in development and so forth, billions of crowns to produce a product on the market, perhaps a medicine or new car, something very special. They will realize, perhaps, that before they put this thing on the market to earn money on it, that the same thing is produced as a copy somewhere else because the information was stolen before, some years before. And that is what they are facing.
Now, I only touched upon the things you want to talk about. I know that, and the things that the audience want to talk about. So, here they are. Do you have any questions? Yes. The woman over there.
My name is Anna Truberg. I am the party leader of the Swedish Pirate Party, and I have a question for Ingvar Åkesson from the FRA. I am a little bit concerned that you have twice mentioned copying and immaterial rights. Should that be of any concern for the FRA? I thought you were working with other things. I would like to know why you... I never heard you talk about that before, so I would like to know why there is a special, seemingly new interest in copying.
Well, I'm here to talk about information assurance and not signals intelligence.
Okay. Well, if you have questions about something else, you will probably answer that, I think, the best way. Do we have more questions? Yes? Okay.
Hi, Michael Törnvall, journalist at Dagens Industri. Question, I guess, mainly for TeliaSonera is, first of all, when you're talking about you had to answer to human rights, which is quite easy to know what you're looking at because human rights are universal, but you also say that you need to follow the law, which could be very different from a country like Sweden to Uzbekistan, for instance. So when do you decide that you can't only follow the law, it's not enough? And also, do you see now, especially in light of what's happened in the past few years, instances where you don't go into a country, where you would even consider leaving a country because you feel that especially problems with human rights is just too big?
So the first question was what I've referred to in my initial remarks. So the UN framework, Protect and Respect and Remedy, which there is a broad agreement about, puts the bar quite a bit higher than only following the law. That's what I explained, that we need to have some kind of point of challenge, to ask for clarification, to work with peers, to go to our home government, maybe to NGOs, to work with transparency. But we also need to work with our internal processes, learning, and instructions and guidelines for our employees in the one company, in the one TeliaSonera group that we have. So it's following the law, but it's not. It doesn't stop there. There are other measures over and above that. And then, as to your second question, that of course is a question for the TeliaSonera board, which I could not answer. But on a general level, there is always an assessment by any company as to new markets, and sometimes a company would decide to go into a new market, and sometimes a company would decide not to go in. And such decisions, of course, are also based on issues regarding human rights. And yeah, I think that's where I'll stop.
Okay. I think you need a follow-up question, or it seems like you're not quite satisfied.
Yeah, maybe if you could go into a little bit more detail when you think it would be wise for a company now to considering leaving a country, and also do you think it has changed in light of what happened with after the scandal in Uzbekistan, in terms of is the bar higher now when a Swedish company should consider leaving a country because of human rights violations so on than it used to be just a few years ago? So are the standards now higher than they used to be in terms of all the human rights problems that have been exposed?
Again, I can't give very specific answers because I would have to refer to the TeliaSonera board on these issues. However, as you know, our former CEO is one of the few in the industry that has said that we need to look into also the option of leaving. However, as it comes to my company, TeliaSonera, there is no such specific country that would be on such a list for the moment.
Okay, Robert.
Well, I have some few comments both on that Mikael was saying, but also earlier. I find it a bit difficult, and perhaps this is very symbolic for the discussion as such, because it becomes very abstract. It's abstract when it comes to legislation. I don't know as a citizen, I don't know how to behave, how to avoid having my communication interfered with by the authorities. I don't know exactly what the work of FRA actually entails. I don't know, and the legislature doesn't know. I'm pretty sure that the majority of our parliamentarians didn't have a clue what they actually were deciding when it comes to FRA legislation, for instance. And there's, as I was saying earlier, there's an imbalance in the system. Getting back to also what the discussion between Mikael and Patrik, there's a lot of discussions about principles. For me, it's quite simple. We have all the principles in place, everything from the UN Declaration to the different conventions, etc. Mainly when it comes to human rights work, it's not about the principles or the lack of legislation, it's the lack of implementation. And if you have a look, for instance, at the Global Network Initiative that TeliaSonera is now cooperating with, and you look at these principles that they put up, as a comparison, I just looked at TeliaSonera's website to find out which countries they are active in. If you would apply the guidelines, and I know that TeliaSonera is not part of GNI, but still, as an example, if you would apply the principles as such, Telia wouldn't be able to work in half of the countries, 7 out of 15 countries that they are active in. If you would take the implementing guidelines that are resulting from the principles, it's not a problem at all. Because then it's all about the dialogue, it's all about having a discussion with the different governments about these important issues. But above all, while the principles are referring to international law, the guidelines are all the time referring to local or national legislation. And we know for sure that...
And so where do we go from there, do you mean?
Well, I think that, as always, we need to go from, and I know that I'm part of it, from this abstract discussion and talk about principles and have a closer look at the implementation. And it's really difficult. I don't have the answer to that. But that's really, down to the nitty-gritty, is really what it takes to have a quality discussion, both from the legislator's point of view, from the implementers, but also from the civil society.
Yes. Do we have more questions? Yes, over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan Gaines, I work at Söderhof at the Digital Design Agency. Just a quick question for the FRA. Do you find that encryption and anonymization technologies such as Tor or VPNs make your work harder?
For us as a signals intelligence agency, or?
As in your job as a FRA head.
Well, encryption has been a challenge for us as long as we have been existing. So, yes, of course, it's a challenge, and I can't be more specific than that, of course. But it's nothing new. It's not a new challenge. We've been doing this for as long as signals intelligence has been exercised.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, Benjamin, PhD student at KTH. Also a question to Ingvar Åkesson. I was also a bit surprised that you talked about industrial espionage. So to make it more concrete, do you see a responsibility of the FRA to protect companies from industrial espionage? And if so, what concrete measures would the FRA take to protect the companies in that way?
Well, the present regulations say that we can only do information assurance practices to government agencies and government-owned companies. So industry, we are not allowed to help or do any information assurance practices on. But if we were, for instance, those who own infrastructure, which is very important for society, if we were allowed to assist there, there are means. We can, of course, look into their systems to see if they are composed in an orderly way, and we can also put sensors to detect the intrusions. All those schemes are available, but only for government agencies at present.
So, are you happy with that? Okay. Do we have more questions? Yes.
Dan Meredith from the Open Technology Fund again. This is for TeliaSonera and the signal intelligence gentlemen. For example, right now Sweden's, all three of the operators only employ about 25% of the protections that ensure text and voice is encrypted. This is a civil society report, so it is only as reliable as that, I suppose. But how do you see that as something that could be done both within your own country, but then also in other countries that you're investing in to try to protect these digital rights from the infrastructure, essentially sort of putting guardrails and lights on streets?
I'm not a technician, but I would say from a company point of view, from a listed company, if there is a consumer demand for encryption, if this was the case, right, then we would provide it if there was a business case, of course. And the human rights aspect that would be in this would be an add-on, of course, considered as well when analyzing this business case.
Okay. Do we have more questions? Do we have more concrete examples? Because try them out now.
I think that one thing that this discussion shows is that there are different interests. And I mean, one thing that would have been really interesting is to have both the Ministry of Justice on this stage together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Because there are even different opinions within the government about freedom, what freedom of the internet actually entails, and then you have the interests of music, what do you call it, sharing music on the internet, etc., and that struggle. So I mean, of course, it is really a complex issue.
And one remark to that, of course, would be that our business case is free flow of information. So in that sense, we have the same aim as our customers. We don't want restrictions or chilling effects and people being uncomfortable using our networks. We want the free flow of information because that's our business case.
We talked before about how much time do we have. Do you think these issues and these problems will increase? And what are you doing meanwhile?
Yes, it's increasing, and we are.
Could you tell me when it's increasing? Can you tell me figures or something?
And define the problem.
And define the problem, yes. Increasing on what?
The problem is that information is exfiltrated by those who are not supposed to have it. It could be government secrets, commercial secrets,
company information,
and all that. Now, and a lot of government agencies are attacked.
But do you know this because they report it to you and say someone is disturbing?
We see it. We actually see it when we're there helping them, and also by our signals intelligence practices, we can see that happening. So yes, are we doing something? Yeah, we presented a technical detection and warning system to the government. They asked, would you like to present such a system to us? Yes, we said, and then we made a report, 2 reports actually, and now it is some concerns in or they are thinking about it in the government offices, as it's usually said. But actually, government put to Parliament when they put their budget proposition last autumn. They said that yes, a warning detection system, as FRA has described, should be imposed and be run within the framework of FRA. So
but
there
Ingvar,
is
can you tell me
but we have not heard any answer really from the government. So we are waiting.
I see.
There are
but can you
possibilities.
Can you please tell me, when we're talking about increasing, can you tell me percentage? How, if you compare it from last year, this time?
No, I can't give you such figures.
You can't, or you don't want to?
No, I can't, but if I could, I perhaps didn't want to.
Okay, okay. I tried at least.
But
I tried.
It's a huge problem, and most agencies involved in this, they agree on this. And internationally, you can see in the press that it's a great concern in America and in Great Britain and Australia and so forth.
Yeah. Patrik wants to say something.
Yeah, if the perspective that we have in this room today is the individual who is to enjoy human rights. That's the perspective we should have, I think. And then, of course, there is the positive development with the UN framework, Protect, Respect, Remedy, which we now all work with to know and show that we respect human rights, and for companies to protect. So there is actually some material that we can work and progress based on that basic framework.
But Patrik, what is your largest concern?
The largest concern I'm coming to now is that in the wired community, of course, where we will have more and more computers in our home, machine to machine, etc., the amount of data will grow enormously, and thus the risk for intrusions as to privacy.
But what are your largest concern, more specific? You're saying the same thing all the time. What kind of concern do you have? Is it Ingvar is talking about companies being hacked? On the private area, what are your largest concern?
The enormous amount of data that we're already having and that will multiply in years to come.
Okay, Robert.
Well, I think that getting back
this
to
is the answers we get.
Yes, well, I hope I'm not adding to the confusion then. When I think that the problem definition, first with Ingvar, which I think that, but also Patrik, we're talking about presenting the state and the companies as sort of the victims to a large extent, instead of having a citizen or a consumer perspective, which I think is part of the problem, and that will definitely cause future problems in the sense that the state, for instance, will use this description and the threat against national security to increase the interception of people's communication. And it's just a matter of time before the shit hits the fan, if you don't mind the expression.
Not at all.
And it will hit the fan, and it's just a question of time.
I think that was a good roundup for this discussion. Do we have more questions right now? Otherwise, the gentleman will be here, of course, until we end later on. And so thank you for now. We have 20 minutes of break and collect more questions, and we will come back with the next panel. So thank you for now, gentlemen.
Thank you.